Today, I want to talk about the idea of avoiding discomfort at all cost. Now, I think if you really think about that, or if you superficially think about that, it seems like a okay goal. It seems like there's nothing wrong with avoiding discomfort, avoiding suffering, avoiding these things that seem as if in this day and age we should minimize because they're already in abundance. But I don't think that is the way that we should walk, the way that we should go about living life. Avoiding discomfort at all costs is essentially avoiding growth at all cost because you can't grow without change, and change will always be uncomfortable. That's just the nature of it. When we think about the body, we get growing changes or growing pains, and that's implies growth. Um, and I can really see why people people have such a hard time doing what they need to do, walking a path true to themselves, taking leaps of courage to go out there and try to become something. And it's because we're so used to this idea of avoiding discomfort at all cost. Because that is what we all really do. That is that is the phone's greatest utility. Avoiding discomfort, avoiding silence, avoiding being alone. A lot of people may think they spend a lot of time alone, but they do not. If you are on your phone, you are not alone. You It is not the same as solitude when you are alone all day on your phone versus being alone all day with just you and yourself. These are two very, very different things. And the phone just promotes this idea of avoiding discomfort, of never leaning into the silence, never leaning into uncomfortable situations, always doing whatever you can, whatever's in your power to avoid it. And that is not the way to go about life. And when you need to take huge leaps and you have this habit of avoiding discomfort, it becomes extremely hard. I noticed this when I came home for a bit and I had to get some vaccines to go to Asia, and I had to wait a bit, and I didn't want to wait as long as I had to, and I started giving in to, I had a bunch of free time, and I slowly started giving into the phone, scrolling or watching more, even like watching long form YouTube videos. That can be a form of avoiding discomfort, of avoiding the hard tasks that you really should be doing, of yeah, avoiding the hard tasks that you really should be doing. And when the time came for me to go, it was extremely hard. I really, I didn't even really want to go, but it was just kind of one of those things where, I know I'm going to regret it if I don't. I know I should. I mean, the whole reason I, you know, quit and did this whole thing was to go. So at least, take the leap. And then the leap was the hardest part. The leap was the hardest part. It always is. And after that, it was easy. 6 months, easy. And it was all because I got into the habit of avoiding discomfort. And when the occasion arose where I had to lean into discomfort, where nobody was going to make me, no one was going to force me to do this thing, I wasn't going to get kidnapped and thrown on a plane. I had to do everything willingly. It becomes hard because you're actively leaning into something that you've been programming your brain to not lean into. And that's why I think the phone can be such a dangerous thing in social media, because it's so easy to avoid discomfort with it. But it's also every aspect of life. Avoiding discomfort at all cost, avoiding suffering, hating suffering. It's people never people never look at the opposite side of the spectrum. They look at, all the suffering in the world, and they think that the world would be better without suffering. But in the true sense of the word, it wouldn't be. It would be horrible if everything was just pleasure and avoiding discomfort. There's the quote or the idea that the the training program for wisdom is suffering. Like, to become wise, you have to suffer. And everyone suffers differently. But the worst thing that's happened to someone is still the worst thing that's ever happened to somebody. And we can all grow from our suffering, whether it's a first world problem or a third world problem. It doesn't essentially matter in the idea of growth and wisdom. And if you just lean into it and you take the lessons that it's trying to teach you, you can become a far better person for it. And it's extremely valuable to just to just have the habit of leaning into discomfort. It helps you in every facet of life, because this is something, we kind of have to override, because, nature, it was advantageous for us for a long time to use as little amount of energy as possible, because, food was scarce. There's a chance you might have to like run away from a lion, or, something crazy. It was advantageous to save energy. It was advantageous to do everything the easy way. It was advantageous to avoid discomfort at all costs, because it was so ingrained into the world. When you're at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, it makes sense to avoid discomfort because it's already there. It's already all around you. But when we are at the stage we are, you truly have to lean into it, because if you don't, the only discomfort you'll ever have is, the discomfort of your stomach being too full, of having brain fog, of feeling depressed, which is all suffering. Like, don't get me wrong. And if you lean into it, you'll grow from it. But the nature of that suffering is implying that you already are leaning in to, or leaning away from discomfort. So when you feel that discomfort arise, you're going to lean away from it again. If you feel depressed, you're not going to lean into that. You're going to go to your phone. If your stomach hurts, I mean, you kind of got to wait that one out. But you're not going to really like think about, why does my stomach hurt? I need to stop doing this, that, and the other. You're kind of just, like, maybe take some medicine and try to get the quick fix. And that's why, when you have this habit, it's such a horrible habit to have. And people in this world, in this day and age, don't understand that. They don't completely understand the person who does hard things just because they're hard. But you in this world, it's not that hard anymore. I mean, for some people, it is, of course. It'll always be. And for everyone, it is to a certain degree. But the fact that nowadays, more than ever, we need to lean into discomfort, because it's not this thing that's a given. It's not this thing that is just going to be there no matter what. And if we lean into it, we're just increasing it. You know, Seneca has this idea, extremely wise idea, we suffer more in imagination than reality, which is so true. And often we suffer more than is necessary because we suffer before it is necessary, which is also just such a profound and amazing thing to realize. But that isn't Seneca saying that we need to avoid suffering. It's that we don't need to add on to our own suffering. We don't need to add on to our own discomfort, because when it's truly there, which it will be, and we just take it for what it is, we learn what is necessary. And we don't need to overplay it in our imagination, especially in the beginning of our journey to changing your habit to leaning into it. And leaning into it doesn't mean suffering because of it, not like saying, woe is me because I'm about to suffer. It's saying, you can always reframe things. And I think it's extremely powerful to do that. And if the only way you can become wise is through suffering, I mean, that adds a whole new scope, a whole new mindset to the idea of suffering. It's not this horrible thing to be avoided at all costs. It's actually this thing that should be leaned into with a engaging mind that is striving to learn the lessons that this thing is trying to teach. And you don't need, it's a fine line. And like I said, you need to lean into discomfort. You need to sometimes promote discomfort, just make it happen. But other times you don't need to do that. Other times it's already naturally there. It's already naturally happening, and you just need to be yourself, or not be yourself. Um, you just need to allow it to happen. But I really just want us to get that point across that you don't need to avoid discomfort at all costs, and you actually shouldn't, because when you need to start striving to live a life true to yourself, it's going to be so extremely hard. It's going to be nearly impossible to take these leaps that are necessary, because you're going to have to lean into discomfort. You're going to have to suffer, because this stuff's hard, no matter what you're doing. It might sound easy that I quit my job and then, traveled the world like for 8 months the last year, but it wasn't easy. It was hard. It was uncomfortable. It was the uncertainty, you know, the future, all these things. It's not easy. It's not an easy thing. And I think it was actually way harder than a year of me working would have been, especially with the growth and the changing and the wrestling with things that come up. And if I almost ruined it. That's another thing. I almost ruined it because I had an abundance of free time and I allowed myself to spend some of it in avoiding discomfort, which built the habit of avoiding discomfort, which when the time arose, it was hard. I took the leap because I was in the moment. Well, I took the leap in the beginning to say I'm going to do this thing, but that was only because I was already such a habit of discomfort. I was already a person who leaned into discomfort and always. And then after I took the initial leap, I slowly started leaning away from discomfort. And that made the first leap to go, to Europe hard. And then that made the second leap to go to Asia even harder, because I had this idea of, I guess I'm beating a dead horse, so I'll end it with this. But I had this idea that I was leaning into discomfort, which was the opposite of what I started to do, which was hard for me to override my brain. But in those situations, sometimes you just got to take the leap and realize the leap is just the hardest part. And then in a week, your brain's going to be rewired, or in a few days, your brain's going to be rewired again. And as long as you change your habits, I immediately changed my habits when I started traveling. I didn't go on social media at all. I didn't use any of these things to avoid discomfort. I was just present, doing what I wanted. Oh, sorry, my nose is leaking. Um, yeah. And then I changed, and then 6 months of greatness, 6 months of a very, very, very good trip. And then I came home, and I realized I started leaning away from discomfort again, and I can see how everything just slowly starts falling apart. And then now I have my next trip that I'm gonna do, which is a 3-month hike from Yosemite to Canada border, and I need to change because I cannot. This one's a little bit too big of a leap for me to just not be in the right mindset. And I still have time, I got like 3 weeks, so it's a good time to catch myself. But I could see it, and that's why I'm making this video. I could see myself doing what I did last time, and I just said, no, I can't do that again. This time I can't do that. I need to continue. I need to get away from discomfort, and I need to lean into discomfort. But yeah, you get the point. Don't avoid discomfort at all cost. It'll ruin your life.